All right. Hope the audio is good.
Yeah.
Okay. Then, yeah, welcome to this new session. This will be about cryptoeconomics a bit, some MEV and incentives, and I'm also the session chair. So I introduce myself for this talk. I'm Burak. I'm a PhD at TU Munich and working on incentive mechanisms on blockchains. And this paper you will now hear about is about the block building market on Ethereum, and we discuss what were the factors that led to the state that the market is in today, which is like it's a centralized market with a few actors simply monopolizing the whole block space. So the paper is titled "Who Wins Ethereum Block Building Options and Why?" And yeah, like who wins part is easy to answer. You can just look at historical data, but we are more interested in the why here. And this paper was written together with Danny Tsui from Flashbots and Thomas Thierry from Ethereum Foundation. Okay, so let's first briefly start with the status quo. That is, today around 90% of all blocks are produced through this off-chain mechanism called MEV-Boost, which the idea is that as a validator, you simply let go your block construction rights, and in exchange you get paid for this, and this is held through an auction called MEV-Boost. And well, back in the study, in the days of the study, which covers from I think October 2023 to April 2024, 90% of all blocks were produced through this mechanism. And then what we also see is that in this time frame of 6 months, only 3 builders built around 80% of all blocks. So yeah, Ethereum, it's like the ethos is let's have it decentralized, censorship-free, and so on. But you see that like every 12 seconds, like a block is created and the transactions are simply given some space in this block, and we assume that okay, like no censorship can happen because it's decentralized, so not one single entity is controlling the whole block space. But yeah, what we see is that 3 guys are simply building 80% of almost every block, and this is the result that the market now converged into in the MEV-Boost market, and this is of course a design decision, like why we implemented this MEV-Boost thing in the first place, but there are nice papers about that. Today I'm going to be focusing about, okay, like how did we come here, how did these guys become so powerful? And in this chart on the left, what you see is that on the X and Y axes, it's just showing the total profits that every builder has made. So each builder is presented with a scatter, and then the size of the bubble simply indicates how many blocks they have built, or in other words, what is their market share. And on the y-axis, you see like the total ETH that they have earned from the block rewards, which is like the transaction fees plus these direct builder Coinbase transfers that they have received. And then on the x-axis, what you see is the profit margin. So from all these fees that's given to the builder in the block, then he has to offer the validator some amount of it. So we see like, okay, how much of it did he keep to himself? So if we take a look at an example, let's say if there is this builder, let's say EigenPhi, which is pretty close to like 0 profit margin, this simply means that, okay, the transactions included in EigenPhi blocks, they, let's say, pay X on total on average, and EigenPhi is then always transferring all of this X value to the proposer to win the auction, to win the right to build the block. But you also see, as you go towards right and up, you see these like purplish colored builders who have like profit margins around 30-40%, and this indicates that these guys are extremely profitable. But okay, how can this be? Like, why doesn't EigenPhi or this guy also keep profits? Well, you have to win the auction in the first place to propose your block and then to keep profits, but you can only keep profits if if other builders, other block producers don't have access to the order flow, to the transactions that you have access to. And these guys you see there, they are usually, all of them are just doing searching themselves, so extracting the MEV themselves, and then of course they keep those transactions to themselves. And because they earn so much money from those transactions, they pay that money to their own builder, who then wins the auction, and these guys can keep this much profit. And then we have these three builders that I mentioned, which are building around 80% of the blocks: Titan, Weaverbilt, and Arsync. And you see that, okay, they don't have that much profit margin, but they don't also have to be that profitable, because you see these bubbles are pretty small, indicating that these guys aren't building that many blocks. But you see these three builders, they have such large market share, of course, like building that frequent blocks, and then over time, like with their even around 5%, 3% profit margins, they can make, like, in aggregate, a lot of money. So we want to understand, like, how we came here and, like, what is the issue with this. So the issue is obvious: censorship. If three builders are building around 80% of the blocks, and let's assume that all those three builders hate you for some reason, well, if you want to get your transaction on chain, you have like 20% chance that every block that someone other than these three builders build the block. And now think it like this: okay, based on the incentives of these builders, they can simply try to say, like, they can simply leave out some transactions to, like, for their own benefits, and then, like, try to, I don't know, extract some value themselves and so on. And this is totally against our censorship resistant ethos of Ethereum. And at the end, if I have time, I will mention some of the solutions to combat against this censorship problem. But the paper is more about, okay, how to become a successful builder. So how can you win the auction? And then also, like, you see that, yeah, you can win the auction and have these large bubbles, but this doesn't also always mean that you will have high profit margins, because you see this builder, for example, T builder, it has a relatively large bubble, indicating it has a good market share, but the profit margin is, and the total profit is negative. And then what this indicates is that, like, this guy is building a block and then, let's say, like, getting maybe 100 ETH as transaction fees, but every time he wins the block, he ends up paying more than 100 ETH, so more than the transaction fees that he gets. So he subsidizes, he pays from his own pocket, and he does this so that he grows a market share, and then maybe he will attract some searchers to, like, send their order flow to them, because, okay, then they would say, okay, this guy can land blocks, so let's work with him. But the point is that winning the auction does not always mean that you're going to be profitable as well. So we also look at, like, how you can be profitable. Okay, so then let's briefly look at, like, how this block auction works in a MEV-Boost. And the thing we try to understand is that, okay, how do builders, like, bid, what brings them value, and then what do they account in this bidding process. So on Ethereum, a block slot is like 12 seconds, and before your slot count, and the protocol expects you to propose a block at the beginning of your slot, which means that if you are using MEV-Boost, for example, in the previous 12 seconds, you should listen to the bids, and then on time, you should say, okay, this is the block that I'm picking, and propose that at the beginning of the slot. So at t-12, then let's assume that the mempool is empty, so there is no transaction yet, so ideally no builder will have an incentive to bid anything. And then transactions start to arrive, and, like, a transaction arriving simply means, okay, there is some value that the builder has now from the transaction fees, and then based on, like, the builder's internal valuation of this, he will bid some percent of it to the proposer. And of course, like, we can also think about, okay, profit margin is one aspect, but also, like, at what point in time of the auction are we? Like, maybe if we are at the beginning of it, I don't want to really reveal all of my true value, but towards the end, after I also see the other bids, maybe I can try to, like, bid then something based on that. And then I can also have this subsidy profile. And so we can then just, like, wrap all of this in a bid function that every builder has for themselves. And then, yeah, we see simply bids start to come in this block auction. And what happens is then, as the time evolves, more transactions land into the mempool. Builders update their valuation, and then they reflect this through the new bids. And then the proposer, the actually allocated validator of that slot, simply says, okay, at some point in time, I say, okay, let's finish this auction, so give me the best bid, and simply the MEV-Boost middleware returns the guy the highest available value block at that point, and this block is proposed. So what happens is then the builder of that block lands his block, so lands his transactions on chain, and for doing this, pays to the proposer. But of course, the critical question here is, does transactions, all of them, have the same value for the builder, or some transactions are actually more valuable? And for this, like, we try to first understand which transactions bid for Ethereum block space today, because we know that, like, not every transaction has the same priority for its originator. Like a sensitive transaction, like a SEX-STEX arbitrage, will probably be inclined to pay a lot more transaction fee than, I don't know, just a simple e-transfer. So we propose this taxonomy of transparent, which starts with transparency labels. So we first ask, okay, was this transaction seen in the public mempool, or was it privately relayed to the block builder? So we call them exclusive signal. And then we also differentiate these transactions which were part of an order flow auction bundle, which is, like, the idea there is that the transaction is not submitted to the public mempool, but then actually the transaction details, or some part of it, is exposed to a group of searchers who background them. So we classify that as a separate group. But this is about the transparency label. And then we have these order flow labels, which is about the objective of the transaction, like what does the transaction want to do. So we classify MEV transactions, we classify transactions from these Telegram bots who, like, you give your private key to them from Telegram, and then they do trading activities for you. We have these solver models or solver transactions from these protocols like CowSwap, UniswapX, and OneInfusion. We have the classic deposit and withdrawal transactions from Sexes. And then we have this thing called swap flow, which is like any transaction which isn't involved in anything previous, but still has a swap. So this could be like a really pure, I don't know, Uniswap front-end swap transaction that you do, so we call that retail. But it could also be some transaction which interacts with a smart contract that we don't know what it does, but we see that it does some swaps. So you can expect to see, like, long-tail MEV strategies also covered here. We have the OFA bundles background covered separately, and then anything that we couldn't bundle, we just label them as public flow or exclusive flow, or like other public flow, and so on. And you can think it like the simple e-transfer between two EOAs would go into this other public flow. And I don't know if you are MEV searcher and just deploying a smart contract but doing nothing else, this would probably then go into this other exclusive flow. And the methodology of the paper is we first want to look into the builder market, the order flow labels, and the builder strategies to, like, quantify, okay, like which metrics are important, and then we take these features and then actually try to find the ones which are relevant for winning the auction, and then also relevant for making profits. So first we start with this MEV-Boost decomposition. And how am I doing on time?
You got 10 minutes.
Okay. So first we start with the builder market. So the first part is going to be more descriptive. So I will, this abbreviation, BRT, stands for Beaver, Build, Rsync, and Titan, the most dominant three builders. So first we look at, like, their market share, their cumulative profits over time, and the profit margin. And, like, what's important here is that, yeah, we see these three builders have around 80% market share per day. But actually what's interesting here is in their profits over time. So this purple one is indicating Titan, and then green and orange are Beaver, Build, and Rsync. And you see that like Beaverbuild and Arsync usually have more like consistent growth, whereas Titan has this spike starting in February, beginning of February, and then ends up actually having much more profits than Arsync. But like on market share part, actually Arsync still has a larger market share. So we try to like understand why this happens. And yeah, one caveat here is that the profits that we calculate here, this is purely based on the transaction fees on-chain, but actually we know that builders have off-chain deals with order flow providers. So maybe you are sending, like a Telegram bot is sending me their order flow for inclusion and paying me a lot of money, but through our deal, I actually return them back some of the value that they paid me. So actually this Titan value that we see here, this is like an overestimation for sure. And also the same applies for Arsync and Beaverbuild, because what we will show is that these guys have their own searchers. So then these searchers working for them are actually also making profits. So that in that case, we're actually underestimating the total profits that they have made. And yeah, this is again like some of the key takeaways from here. Yeah, one interesting thing here is that on this right-hand side, it shows like the daily profit margin of the builders over time. And the interesting part here is this purple plot of Titan. It has some days which it has a negative profit margin, whereas the other guys are much more consistent. And this is again because the other two guys, they are these high-frequency traded firms, and they have their own searchers, so they can always consistently have valuable order flow, which like makes them profitable. Whereas Titan is dependent on external providers, so they cannot be that consistent as the other two builders. And we identify 10 builders which have like 1% market share or more, in total making up around 97-98% of the whole market. You can find all the numbers and everything in the paper, which I will share at QR code. So the exact numbers here don't matter right now, but the charts that I'm going to show now will focus on these 10 guys. But first, let's look at the transaction labels. So first, we look at the transactions value and block space consumption based on their transparency. And the key takeaway here is that exclusive transactions, exclusive signal, which is this purple area, provides around 66% of all like transaction fees and Coinbase payments, so like the block value or MEV, whatever you call, but it only consumes around 20% of block space. So the valuable transactions, they're actually not like that frequent or not consuming that much block space, but value-wise, actually they're providing much more than the public transactions. And yeah, these like exclusive signal transactions constitute around 71% of all block value in more than 50% of the blocks. And then here you can see like which transaction, which order flow labels, so that second layer of the taxonomy, what percent of them are private and what percent of them are public. These more valuable labels, you can see that they're always mostly private, so actually Telegram bot transactions and MEV strategies are around 99% bypassing the public mempool. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the builders or blocks composition in terms of transparency. So how much of the value is coming from public transactions to a builder versus private. And again, in the paper, you can see this for like the 40 builders which were active in the time period. This is only the top 10. And like one of the results that we will show at the end is that builders who have higher market share and higher profit margin, they also have higher private transaction share, which makes sense. And then we look at the significance of the order flow labels. And what you see here is that on the legend, you can see the labels themselves, and then on the left-hand side, it shows their value-wise share. So, for example, Telegram bot flow and then the MEV flows cumulatively contribute around 51% of all block value, while only consuming 10% of gas. So this is again supporting the previous finding. So valuable transactions, they are not that frequent, but value-wise, they are dominating the actual transactions, which take up most of the space, which is like the classic retail swap transactions and other public transactions. And then on the right-hand side, you see the builder's transaction composition, but we will come to that. And then we also look at 4 different builder strategies. Okay, so we look into block packing strategies. That is, if we divide the block into 3 sections, which is like the top 10% of the block position-wise, bottom 10%, and then the body of the block, we see that around 74% of the block value for these top 3 builders come from the top 10% of the block. And this is again because these top 10% actually has, I think, around like 80% of the, or 88% of all exclusive transactions. So what this means is that the exclusive valuable transactions, they go to these successful builders, and they usually reside in the top of the block because they want to be the first to get executed on the latest stale state, which they know, like that was the state that they like build their transaction on. So they don't want any slippage happening before them. And then we also see these subsidy strategies, or like in general, like was the builder profitable, or was it not making any profit, or was the builder subsidizing? And again, one of the results that we converge into is these high market share builders are also the ones who can build more profitable blocks. So you can already get the feeling that this like kind of hints at a chicken and egg problem. Like if you want to be profitable, you need to attract exclusive transactions, but to attract such transactions, you need to have high market share. So then how does a new builder enter this market? Your only option is simply subsidizing or running your own searcher. And then the 2 last strategies we look into is exclusive order flow access, and we show here like which builders have access to exclusive transactions from which providers. So this will also in the results show like which builders actually run which searchers. And then we also have some latency and bidding strategies, which is more about the block option that I introduced. So you see that also the successful builders are also the ones who have better latency usually, or have better shots at gaming the auction by like using these things called cancellations and so on, for example. Okay, so the results. I think the results are pretty interesting, especially this one. So what we see here is that I showed you this in the significance of order flow labels slide. Every block builder had this order flow composition, like which percent of, like which order flow labels say, like, I don't know, sandwich provide what percent of value to each builder. And like you see that like each builder had like, I don't know, 20% something, 10% something. So, and we calculated Shannon entropy value indicating the diversity of order flow of each builder. And what we see is that the diversity of the builders are actually positively correlated with their market share. So the builders who have higher market share also have a more diverse order flow, whereas the builders who have more concentrated order flow composition, which means they have a lower entropy. So if you go up here, the market share decreases. You see that the entropy also decreases. And this is usually because those builders cannot really attract any order flow, or they just have their one searcher, which is just building one or like sending one type of transactions. So they cannot be really that good at the auction that often. So if you want to win the auction consistently, you need diverse order flow, which is like consistently available, so which makes you competitive. And then this chart is then showing actually, we use some ML model to find the builder searcher integrations. And again, this hints that actually 55% of the builders have at least one exclusive provider like a searcher, and then this also has a positive correlation with their profits. And then this is just another chart showing all the features that I showed in the initial slide and which are correlated with what, and this is what points to the chicken and egg problem. I skipped the discussion and solution space right now, but yeah, the key takeaways are we find that order flow diversity is correlated with the block market share, and having an exclusive provider helps you with keeping more profits. And all of this at the end points to a chicken and egg problem, where to profit you need exclusive order flow, but you only do that if you have high market share. And we discussed the solutions for preserving censorship resistance, which I couldn't do right now. The paper will be featured in AFT. You can find it on archive. And if you don't want to like remember the title of the paper or anything, you can just search Vitalik got surprised by this chart on Google, and then I think you can find the paper. And that's gonna be it for now. So I guess we don't.
Yeah, maybe one quick question.
Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for your talk.
Yeah.